I always like to be well prepared for these videos and these shows, and I do my research, I do my homework, I study up leading up to the event. And one thing I could not have predicted was that Khabib would not only win tonight, which I did predict, but Khabib would retire in the cage after the fight. And I'm not shocked based on that speech that he gave. He had a very emotional time in the cage after he beat Justin Gaethje. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Khabib beat Justin Gaethje in the second round of their fight via a triangle, but that's not really even the main story of the event. The main story of UFC 254 will be going forward that Khabib retired. And in his speech, he talked about his father who recently passed away, and they were their bond was formed over martial arts, it seems, and over wrestling and MMA. And Khabib's father was his main coach for his entire career, his entire life. He mentioned that his mom didn't want him to come back and fight without his father in his corner, and he said he would only do it one time, and he was going to be a man of his word and not fight anymore. And it seemed to be a genuine retirement. I don't think this is one of those retirements where the person says they're retired and comes back 2 or 3 times. And I think he's done. I think he's going to stick to his word and be retired for good. And I respect the decision. I had all this research done about who he could fight next and why and when. And really, when you look at the division at 155, I mean, he's already said that Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor, the winner of that fight doesn't excite him because he's already beat both of those guys. And yeah, you can make an argument that Michael Chandler would be a good challenge for him, and I think that would be a good challenge for him, but obviously that's not enough to keep him in the sport when what he probably had to go through this week in fight week without his father there for the first time in his entire career. It's got to be a devastating, devastating, devastating loss to lose your father, but also lose your coach, the person you looked up to the most, and the person who's been with you through every step. So I don't fault him for retiring. Does that make him the greatest of all time, beating Justin Gaethje tonight? I don't know. Maybe this is a conversation better had on the actual podcast with me and Mike where we can argue about it. I don't think that Khabib jumps over GSP as the greatest of all time. I think right now he's the pound for pound best fighter in the world. I don't know that he jumps over Anderson Silva. I don't know if he's better than Jon Jones. But it's hard to argue. I mean, you could make the case that he is, and I couldn't put up too much of a fight. He's 29-0. 29 people have tried to beat him, and 29 people have failed. I think something that does go towards the argument of him being the greatest of all time is that everyone knows what Khabib is going to do in a fight. He's going to come forward, smash you to the cage, take you down, grind on you, and either submit you or TKO you with strikes and ground and pound. Even when people know what he's going to do, they can't stop him. And that's very impressive. And I don't think he gets enough of the credit because most fans would prefer to see Anderson Silva or Jon Jones knocking people out, flashy displays of striking, and ground and pound isn't as sexy as a stand-up specialist, but to be someone at the level of Khabib who you've done whatever you wanted to do to everyone you've ever fought, he might be the greatest of all time. I don't know. Mike and I will discuss it on the next episode, I'm sure, but Khabib beats Justin Gaethje, second round triangle, and retires, shockingly, unexpectedly. 155 going forward, I think this actually sets us up for kind of a cool tournament. You had Michael Chandler, who just signed with the UFC. He was a champion in Bellator, widely considered the best 155er not in the UFC. There's a reason he was the emergency backup for this title fight in case Gaethje or Khabib couldn't fight. Maybe we already have Conor and Poirier fighting in January. Maybe you do Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson, either before then or around that same time. The two winners of those fights, Conor or Poirier, will fight the winner of Chandler or Ferguson for what's now the vacant 155-pound title. You could, if you're the UFC, you could make Conor versus Poirier for the vacant title. But you might not need that to sell that Conor fight. People are going to buy a Conor fight. I think the best route to go is set it up as like a 4-man tournament for the vacant belt. I think that draws a lot of interest, especially when you mix in sort of the unknown of Michael Chandler to most fans. They might not be familiar with him because he hasn't fought in the UFC, but I think if you don't have a Khabib, I think one of those 4 guys is your next UFC 155-pound champion. In the co-main event, Robert Whittaker beat Cannonier via decision. It was a very good fight for Whittaker. He had Cannonier in trouble a couple of times. Cannonier fought out of it. Very back and forth fight in the first round, but as the fight went on, it became more and more the Robert Whittaker show. Robert Whittaker did not look great when he fought Israel Adesanya for the championship. He got finished by Izzy, and I do think he's due for a rematch with Izzy. He's only lost to Izzy in the last 6 or 7 years. He's just, everyone who's not Izzy in 185 in the UFC can't beat Robert Whittaker. I don't know if Whittaker is going to beat Izzy in a rematch. I think he's got a chance to beat him. He did not look good in the first fight, but Robert Whittaker is the best of everyone in that division who's not Israel Adesanya. And I think that's more of a compliment to Izzy than a slight to anybody else, because I think Izzy is just so far ahead of the rest of the division right now. I don't know that anyone in that division is going to beat him, and I think eventually we're going to see Izzy move up and challenge at 205. I know there's all that back and forth with John Jones, and they want to fight at whatever weight, but if we stick to more realistic situations, I think Whittaker's next for Izzy. I think Whittaker would probably lose again, but I would hope for it to be a more competitive fight. For Cannonier, I don't think this loss drops him down too far in the rankings. I mean, he's fighting a guy who was a former champion. He didn't look awful against him. I do think Whittaker won convincingly, but I don't think this drops Cannonier down out of the top 5. I think maybe a fight with Paulo Costa would make sense for both guys. They're both coming off losses. Costa just lost to Izzy. Obviously, Cannonier just lost to Whittaker. Those are 2 guys who are still in the mix at the top, and if you put those 2 guys together, the winner jumps right back up into title contention, and the loser has to figure something out against a lower-ranked guy. So I think going forward, Whittaker gets the rematch against Izzy off of this fight. Give me Cannonier versus Costa. I'm excited for that fight and to see who can bounce back. But I think right now it's just Robert Whittaker's better than everybody not named Israel Adesanya. Tonight, Alexander Volkov finished Walt Harris in the second round, and it was a really, really beautiful finish. It was a very classic southpaw versus orthodox, where the back leg becomes a good kicking weapon for both guys to the body, because they're both sort of in an exposed stance, and their bodies are more exposed to the guy in the opposite mirrored stance. And Volkov threw this kick straight down the middle at Walt Harris, and Walt Harris clearly was bracing for a more lateral attack, and you could see when it hit, it just sucked everything right out of Walt Harris, and Walt Harris just kind of crumpled, and Volkov jumped on him, and it was such a beautiful shot, and Walt Harris felt the effects so immediately. You thought that it was like a low blow or something, but the referee did a good job, saw the shot landed as a clean shot. Volkov swarmed on him and finished him. It was a good fight. Walt Harris was in trouble in the first round, but fought out of it, and Volkov had good pressure, and both guys were landing in exchanges. I think Volkov was up on the scorecards after that first round, and then came forward again, and like I said, got the finish against Walt Harris. Volkov was coming off of 2 losses coming into this fight against Derek Lewis and Curtis Blades, and those are both guys that are at the top of the division. I don't think that this win tonight against Walt Harris shoots Volkov up into he's got to get a title shot. I still think he's like 1 or 2 wins away from that, but a win tonight against Walt Harris was a big win. Coming off of 2 losses, the heavyweight division is not super stacked, so I don't think you're getting cut after 3 losses. I mean, we have Junior Dos Santos is still in the division with 3 straight losses. They need talent at heavyweight, but for Volkov to win this fight against Walt Harris in an impressive fashion with a TKO, it was a big win for him. I think for Walt Harris, again, I don't think he's getting cut. I don't think he's going anywhere, but he's going to probably have to fight some guys either outside the top 10 in the heavyweight division or someone down below the bottom. Maybe you could do Walt Harris versus Junior Dos Santos, who, like I said, does have 3 losses right now. And this would be sort of a situation where not win or go home for both guys, but if you're Junior Dos Santos and you have 4 straight losses, maybe it's time to start thinking about being done. Walt Harris can maybe get another win here off of JDS and jump back up into the middle of the pack, coming off of a win off of former champion if he can get it done versus Junior Dos Santos. Or you could do Walt Harris versus Ilir Latifi. Latifi's got a couple losses in a row, but he did just move up to heavyweight, but he did lose his debut at heavyweight. So again, maybe you get 2 guys who are struggling a little bit right now. They both have good names in the sport, so maybe a win for one of those guys could put them back up the rankings a little bit. But I think Volkov's still going to hang around in the middle of the pack. I don't think Walt Harris is going to get cut, but I think he needs to get some things figured out. 254 did not disappoint. Great fights, big finishes. Obviously, Khabib retiring is going to be the story of the night, and probably this show too. We're going to have to talk about whether Khabib really deserves the title of greatest of all time. I hope he stays retired. I hate when guys come back after they retired. If you're done, just be done. I feel for him that he did lose his father. I can't imagine what he had to go through this week. I'm glad that if he knew this was going to be his last fight no matter what, that he did go out on a win. I don't think Justin Gaethje is anywhere done. I think he'll come back and he'll be back in title contention very shortly. But good night of fights.